At 1:32 a.m., a hospital security officer asked me one question that made my marriage feel like a crime scene. "Sir, are you still willing to be her emergency contact?" The ringtone cut through my apartment like a blade. Sharp, sudden, wrong. I'd fallen asleep on top of the blanket, the kind of accidental sleep you slip into when your brain is too tired to fight itself. The living room light was still on. My laptop was still open on the coffee table, screen dimmed but awake. My phone buzzed again. At that hour, a blocked call is never good news. It's a collector. It's a mistake. It's someone calling from a parking lot, out of breath, about to ruin your week. I stared at it, thumb hovering over decline. Then it rang a second time, immediate, impatient, like whoever it was had authority over the night. I answered. "Hello." A woman's voice, calm and trained, slid into my ear like a clipped badge. "Is this Daniel Rook?" "Yes." "This is Evelyn Mercer with St. Bartholomew Medical Center Security. You're listed as the primary emergency contact for Kira Rook." My wife's name in a stranger's mouth is a strange thing. It doesn't sound like love. It sounds like paperwork. My throat tightened. What happened? There was a tiny pause, just long enough for her to choose words that wouldn't trigger panic. "Your wife was brought into the emergency department," Evelyn said. "She's stable. But there was an incident in the parking structure, and local police have been notified." Police. My brain tried to build a story that made sense. Car accident. Random crime. Slip and fall. Then Evelyn asked the question that cracked everything open. "Mr. Rook, are you aware of who is currently with your wife? Do you know who is involved?" I sat up slowly, the sheets sliding off my legs. Cold air hit my skin. My apartment felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. "No," I said. "She's out of town." "Understood," Evelyn replied, and her tone shifted, still polite, but careful now. Like she was walking around broken glass. "Her admission paperwork lists a hotel address here in the city. She arrived yesterday." My stomach dropped as if an elevator cable snapped. "She said she was in Denver." I whispered, mostly to myself. "I can't comment on that, sir," Evelyn said. "But I can tell you she requested we contact you, and the person accompanying her is providing inconsistent identification information. He's also claiming you're not in the picture." I looked across the living room toward my laptop. The screen was still on, still open, still showing the photo that had been sitting there like a silent threat before I fell asleep. Kira at a candlelit table, laughing, her skin glowing in warm light. A man's hand on her shoulder like it belonged there. And the caption beneath it, posted publicly, not to me, was the kind of sentence you don't write unless you want to be seen. Some people are a habit you never break. I didn't feel rage. I felt still, like something inside me finally stopped begging for a different reality. "I'm in the picture," I said into the phone, voice flat. "I'm her husband." Evelyn exhaled softly. "Thank you. That helps. Are you able to come to St. Bartholomew tonight?" I checked the time. 1:32 a.m. "Yes," I said, because my body still believed it needed to see her. "I'm on my way." But even as I said it, another part of me, quiet, precise, trained by years of watching patterns, was already doing the thing it always did when something stopped adding up. It started sorting facts. 3 days earlier, Kira had stood by the front door with her suitcase and her bright voice. "Just a quick retreat," she'd said, kissing my cheek. "Leadership workshop. 2 nights. Me and the girls from work. I'll barely have my phone." She didn't look me in the eye when she said the girls. That's the thing about marriage. You learn the microtells. The half-second delay. The over-explaining. The too cheerful tone that sounds like someone holding a smile in place. I noticed because I always noticed. Not because I was paranoid. Because it was literally my job. I worked compliance, claims review, fraud detection. I stared at data all day. I learned what people do when they think nobody's watching. I learned how deception leaves footprints even when the liar swears they're floating. So when Kira said she'd take a rideshare to the airport instead of letting me drive her, something I'd done every trip for 5 years, I felt the first small crack. I didn't confront her. Confrontation makes liars adapt. So I helped her carry the suitcase down the hall. I hugged her. I told her to have fun. I waved like a normal husband. And the second the elevator doors closed, I stood there in the hallway longer than I should have, staring at the empty space she left behind. That night, she texted me a photo of an airplane wing. "Ready to level up?" she wrote. It would have fooled anyone who didn't have the curse of curiosity. I zoomed in. Because I always zoomed in. A faint reflection in the window showed vertical concrete lines and a yellow sign. A parking garage. Not a plane. The lie wasn't even sophisticated. It was just confident. Like she assumed I wouldn't look too closely. Like she assumed I was harmless. The next morning, she sent a selfie in a hotel bathroom mirror. Damp hair, soft smile, towel twisted around her head. Long day ahead, she wrote. Workshops all day. I told her, proud of you. Because I was still practicing being the husband she deserved, even as the floor shifted under my feet. Then my cousin texted me around noon. Is Kira in town? Just saw her story. I didn't even know she'd hidden her story from me until that second. It's a strange punch to realize someone didn't block you. They simply decided you didn't qualify. I asked my cousin for a screenshot. He sent it. Kira clinking champagne on a rooftop lounge downtown. City lights behind her. A man's laugh in the background. Low, familiar, close. I watched the clip 3 times, volume turned up. It wasn't a coworker group laugh. It was the laugh of someone leaning in, close enough that their breath might brush your cheek. That night, I opened our joint account, telling myself I was just checking in. I wasn't. I was looking for the part she couldn't charm away. The bank doesn't care about your excuses. Numbers don't take sides. And there it was. 2 breakfasts. 2 spa passes. A paired relaxation package. A private reservation with a price that wasn't the problem. The problem was that she didn't even try to hide it. That hurt more than the cheating. Because cheating is betrayal. But this was disrespect. This was her assuming I would never notice the math. I sat at my desk with the statement open and felt my face go calm in the mirror reflection of my dark laptop screen. Not because I was okay. Because something in me had switched from husband to witness. I took screenshots, saved receipts, logged dates. Then I waited. Because if you move too early, you become the villain in their story. And if there was one thing I'd learned watching people manipulate systems, it was this. If you want the truth, you let them talk long enough to confirm it themselves. On day 2, her text slowed. Wi-Fi is awful, she wrote. Sorry if I'm quiet. But her public profile wasn't quiet. She posted a photo at a restaurant, warm lights, pretty plating. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a man's hand reaching for a drink. A small crescent-shaped scar on the ring finger. I knew that scar. Not because I'd met the man. Because years ago, early in our marriage, Kira had shown me an old picture and said, too casually, ugh, Miles was such a mess. Miles. Her past. Her mistake. Her never again. Apparently, never again had a hotel check-in time. I didn't call her. I didn't accuse her. I didn't call her. I didn't accuse her. I did what I'm good at. I stayed quiet. And I prepared. That evening, watching fresh charges hit the account in real time, I made my calls. Calm voice, polite tone, every verification question answered smoothly. I asked the credit card company for a temporary security freeze on the joint card due to suspicious activity. Then I asked our bank to place a hold on outgoing transfers from our joint accounts pending review. I didn't touch her personal accounts. I didn't touch my personal accounts. I didn't change locks, passwords, phone plans, nothing that could be twisted into a control narrative. I simply removed my consent. And for the first time in months, I slept like my body had been waiting for permission to rest. Which brings me back to the night the hospital called. I drove there under empty streetlights, hands steady on the wheel. The radio stayed off. My thoughts were loud enough. The ER smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. The waiting room television played a muted infomercial to no one. Evelyn met me at the desk, badge shining under fluorescent lights. Mr. Rook, she said, thank you for coming. Where is she? I asked. She's in a treatment room, Evelyn said. She has minor injuries. But the man with her, Miles Hart, attempted to enter the restricted area. He's being interviewed now. Hearing the name out loud was like a lock clicking into place. Evelyn lowered her voice. She also mentioned she can't access funds, and she's implying she's been restricted. Of course she did. If Kira was going down, she wasn't going down alone. She was already building a version of events where she was the trapped one and I was the controller. A version where the cheating disappeared under the larger, more dramatic accusation. I nodded once. I'd like to see her. Kira was sitting on a hospital bed, hair messy, a thin strip of bandage on her forehead, bruising blooming on her wrist. She looked smaller than she had in her photos. Less curated. Less in control. Her eyes filled when she saw me. Dan, she whispered, like my name was a rope. I stayed near the door. What happened? I asked. It was an accident, she said quickly. I slipped. Miles tried to help, and it turned into a mess. I didn't want the police. She swallowed. I didn't want you to find out like this. Find out what? I asked. Her eyes flicked away. It's complicated. Kira, I said, voice quiet. You told me you were out of town. She wiped her cheeks, leaving wet streaks. I didn't know how to tell you. I ran into him, and it happened. Happened enough for you to get a hotel, I said. She flinched. Happened enough for couples packages on our joint card, I added. Her gaze snapped to mine. You looked at our accounts? I did. For a second, anger flashed across her face, sharp and offended. Then fear replaced it. My cards aren't working, she said, voice urgent now. Dan, the hotel. My things. Miles can't cover everything, and he's freaking out, and I'm stuck, and… There. That was the sentence that sealed it. Not the confession of being with him. Not the apology. The real panic was about the safety net disappearing. She wasn't scared she'd lost me. She was scared she'd lost access. Kira, I said, why are your cards not working? Her mouth opened. Did you? I froze the joint card. I said, temporary hold. Security review. Her face hardened. You can't do that. That's our money. It's also my money, I replied. And you used it without telling me what was happening. She sat up straighter, voice turning sharp, like she was grabbing for the only weapon she had left. This is controlling, she said. This is abusive. The word landed heavy. It was calculated. A story she could tell. A story that would make people rush to her side, no questions asked. I didn't react. I just looked at her until the silence made her uncomfortable. No, I said finally. It's consequences. Her eyes widened as if she couldn't believe I'd spoken that calmly. I'm hurt, she whispered. I needed you. I came, I said. I'm here. You're safe. That's not enough, she snapped, and then she heard herself. Her shoulders slumped, like her anger didn't have the strength to hold up its own logic. I asked her one question, and I meant it. Are you going back to the hotel with him? She hesitated. Not even a denial. Just uncertainty. That was the moment I realized it didn't matter what she said next. She had already chosen the version of herself she wanted to be, and it wasn't the version who stood beside me. I'm going to speak to security, I said, and turned to leave. Dan, please, she cried behind me. I'm your wife. I paused at the door and said the only truthful thing left. You're someone's wife? I said quietly and walked out. The next day, the messages began. At first they were angry. Then they were pleading. Then they were carefully written, like someone had coached her. You can't do this became I'm scared became I have no resources. And then came the emails from the hotel. Then a blocked number called again. This is Lila Nguyen with Street Bartholomew Social Services. She repeated the accusation, financial restriction, unsafe to return, no funds for lodging or transportation. Kira wasn't just lying to me anymore. She was trying to weaponize the system. I stayed calm, because calm is what makes paperwork powerful. Did she mention why she was at a hotel here while claiming she was out of town? I asked. Silence. Then no. I have documentation, I said. She has personal accounts. I didn't touch them. The joint accounts are on hold due to unauthorized usage connected to an undisclosed companion. Another pause. I understand, Lila said, and her tone cooled into professionalism. We'll advise her on alternative resources. Alternative resources. Now you will fix it. Not you're responsible. Just, she will have to handle her own arrangements. I hung up and stared at my basil plant. Alive, green, steady. I watered it. Because life goes on, even when your marriage doesn't. Kira came home 2 days later. Not with anger. With exhaustion. With the face of someone who learned the world doesn't bend just because she cries. She walked in quietly, carrying a small duffel bag. Not her suitcase. Not the confident version of herself from the rooftop lounge. Her eyes went straight to the manila folder on the table. Can we talk? She asked. We can, I said. I know it looks bad, she began. But it didn't mean anything. I was confused. Miles just makes me feel. Like you, I finished. She froze. Like she'd forgotten she'd said that line out loud. I slid the folder toward her. Read. She opened it. Statements. Receipts. Timestamps. Screenshots. A timeline that didn't care about her tone. Page by page, her face lost color. "Why did you keep this?" she whispered. "Because I won't argue about reality," I said. "I won't live in a story you rewrite every time the truth becomes inconvenient." Tears fell. She wiped them quickly, like she was embarrassed to be seen failing. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I know," I replied, and watched that land like a bruise. Because the worst part, for her, was that I wasn't shocked. I wasn't begging. I was already past the stage where her words could change anything. "Are you divorcing me?" she asked, small. "Yes," I said. Her breath caught. "But we can fix this," she insisted. "Counseling. Time. I love you." I looked at her, really looked. Not at the woman I married, but at the woman who hid me from her stories, who spent our shared life like it was hers alone, who remembered my importance only when she needed a landing pad. "I'm not doing counseling with someone who only values me when she needs coverage," I said. I slid a second packet toward her. Separation draft. Basic terms. Notes from my attorney. "I moved my portion of the joint savings," I said evenly. "The remainder stays to handle this properly. It will cover legal expenses." Her eyes widened. "You took money?" "I took what's mine," I said. "I left what's shared to be handled fairly." She stared at me like she was searching for the old version of me. Someone who would cave, someone who would soften. "You're so calm," she said, anger rising. "How can you be calm? Don't you care?" "I cared," I said. "For a long time. Quietly. Until caring became enabling." Her mouth trembled. Then she whispered the sentence that told me she still didn't understand what she'd done. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." And there it was. She didn't think I had teeth. I stood. "You can sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk logistics." She looked up, desperate. "Where am I supposed to go?" I didn't say anything for a moment. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because the honest answer is the kind that feels harsh no matter how gently you say it. "You go wherever you were going when you decided I wasn't part of your life," I said. She inhaled sharply, like she'd been slapped by the truth itself. I walked to my bedroom and closed the door without slamming it. No drama. No yelling. Just a clean ending, like a line drawn with a ruler. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Kira told me you're leaving her." "That's cold. Miles." I stared at the message, then typed one line. "Then keep her warm." I set the phone face down and turned off the light. In the dark, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Because the lesson was never get revenge. The lesson was this. Love isn't a blank check you can cash while lying to the person who earned it. And if someone builds their entire escape on the assumption you'll always be there to catch them, eventually, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is step back and let them meet the ground.